Would now be a good
Yeah,
time to
no,
tell you it's Mara, like a long R.
oh,
Yeah, that'd be a lot of editing.
Mara,
Like Mara, yeah,
more. Well, that's kind of my New York kind of
it's okay.
more. I
I get
coffee,
all kinds, but officially it's
Mara,
Mara. Yeah.
Mara.
Oh, okay. All right. So today in our podcast, we're actually going to have some great guests with us. We have Mark Eichbush. Mark has been a nurse in West Virginia and has worked with us as our nurse consultant for Care for Nurses. So we're glad to have Mark on. And we also have Maura Mullen. And Maura was introduced to us, and we're so grateful for her taking the time to speak with us about her career and her journey as a nurse, getting into the career and some unique perspectives and experiences that she's had. So we're very grateful to have both of you here and to join us in our talk.
Um, Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do this. I think my purpose here is just be honest because I think I hope that it'll open up space for another person that might be struggling with things that I struggled with before. So, um, to get
Yeah.
started, my grandmother was a nurse tech in the army. That's how she got naturalized as a citizen for the United States. And then my mom was a nurse. And I was always told growing up, like, you should be a nurse, you should be a nurse. And I was like the youngest child. So I said, no, I can't listen to what my parents are saying. Right. But I was always like, type A, got to get it done. So finally, I was like, I just need to be a nurse because I enjoy caring for people. I love talking and talking to people and just interacting with, like whether it's patients, neighbors, people out in the community, right? My husband gets very embarrassed by me. But so I knew going into nursing school that I wanted that higher level of care. I wanted to be in the intensive care so bad. It's like what everybody thinks they want to do, right? They want the war stories. They want to say, like, I took care of the sickest of the sick. So going through school, I prepared myself for that. I did my capstone with a resourceful nurse who was pulled to the ICU, stepped down. So I got to see a lot. She also trained in the ED. I did a nurse externship in the CVICU. So I was really like getting that stuff ready. Took my board, 75 questions at the time was what you needed. And it shut off. Like I knew that I was going to make it. And then I started working and then I realized I was really woefully unprepared for what I was seeing, not necessarily the content of it. Like, obviously, you're always learning. There should never be a point where I understand every patient population, but the emotional aspect of it. So, I would say that what I made up for in a knowledge base and being able to interact with my peers or my patients, I really did not have that mental resilience. So, um, and I was working at Ruby. It's a level one trauma center. You're seeing the sickest of the sick. Um, in my first week, it was just like an emotional car crash. I could say that physically and mentally because I was taking care of trauma patients. Um, One of my first patients was a homicide, attempted suicide. So we're taking care of a patient that had, murdered somebody, and I still have to care for him as a patient, right? Because that's our job. We take care of anybody and everybody, regardless of what they've done. Um, Also, my second week as a nurse, and I remember it was a gentleman who had been clean for 10 years, had vegetation on one of his valves, and had a septic emboli, large stroke. So, we're prepping him for core and organ donation, and in walks his kids and child life development are making ornaments from his fingerprints. I was like, oh, that's a lot because I think when you're busy and you're taking care of patients, like either you're taking care of 6 to 7 patients and you're super busy and you don't have time to like realize what you're doing, or you're taking care of these people who are 1 foot in the grave, you don't have time to realize the emotional aspect of it. So when family walks in, or their mom, who is the patient of this person who just tried to kill themselves, successfully killed somebody else, and they're like, this is my child and I love them no matter what, you're like, okay, this is a lot. So I remember the first really, really bad shift. It was all, hey, let's go out after work. Okay, let's go get a drink because we've earned it. We had a bad day and let's decompress, right? So I want to fit in, right? I'm a nurse grad. I want to make those connections with my peers. I want to share stories. I want to learn from them. I just want to be friends, right? Um, and we would do that often. And when I switched to night shift, a local cafe had a happy hour for night shifters at 7 a.m. So it would be like dollar mimosas or whatever it was. So it was very easy to slip into this coping culture, but it was also like that gray area between, hey, this isn't necessarily a healthy coping mechanism. And I at no point will place any blame from somebody who was like, hey, come unload with me, right? Because they're trying to help me and maybe they weren't set up with the best, but I was also lacking that self-awareness like, hey, addiction runs in my family. So what turned into, hey, let's grab a drink after work, turned into, well, all shifts are stressful. Let's have a shower beer, right? So then, hey, I'm off tonight and, I just want to have a chill night. It's been a crazy week. I'll have a drink at dinner or when I wake up. So very slowly became this around the clock where I'm not coping with the underlying situation and I'm not meeting these feelings head on. And I don't really even know how to meet my peers and say I'm having a hard time because when I look around, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing everybody that are just seasoned veterans and professionals that are just digging through the trenches with me and nobody is falling behind. So the case that seemed to really get me was a young gentleman who was at a party, that maybe not everyone in this space has been to, but, fell. And his friends were like, oh, he's just drunk. He just passed out. Let's put him here. Right. Which hopefully no one will be in that situation, but it was a story that I could relate with. And nobody thought to check on him, right? Nobody called his parents. Nobody called EMS because that's as teenagers who are not of legal age, they're not thinking about that, right? Or they're thinking of like, I don't want to get in trouble. By the time he got to us, large bleed, midline shift, right? And here's somebody who, wrong time, wrong event, life is just altered, right? He comes to me super busy. So I'm doing all the things. We're trying to get his intracranial pressures down. We're trying to stabilize him. We're trying to place all these lines. Great. Dust settles and I'm shoving food in my face at this point, and in walks his mom because we haven't been able to get her there yet because he's been so unstable and we've been running back and forth to scan. And it just kind of hit me like, this is a whole person who probably doesn't even know what's going on with him, right? But then like his mom came in and then his dad came in and it's just, you can see that their lives have been altered forever. Whether he recovers or not, there's going to be a hole of his self that is no longer more. So I remember leaving work, getting into my car and crying. And then I went to a gas station near my apartment and still crying and getting a stick of beer and still crying to the clerk. And the clerk's like, maybe I should not. And I was like, it's fine. And then I just remember I went to sleep crying. Right. And that was pretty much the last time I talked about that in this situation. So I'm not saying that I was surviving. I wasn't thriving at this point, but I was going to work. I was getting the job done. I was succeeding at work because I could take high acuity assignments. I was succeeding as a new grad because no one had to check on me. I even had nurse mentors whose job was to check on nurse grads, say, hey, I'm not worried about you. You're doing a great job. You're a rock star, right? I felt like the other end of the rock star that's like not the one that you want to be. But and I ended up taking a trip with my husband. And I just remember us talking about, we were at the point in our marriage, we were talking about maybe we wanted kids, right? And we were buying a house together. And I just had that moment of realization, like, I don't want to be this person if we have children. So like I said, I had addiction in my family. I didn't want them to grow up seeing that. So I just remember having this like aha moment where things have to change for me. I have to be able to talk about this and things have to change for the environment that I'm in because I can't be the only one feeling like this. And I wasn't. I had a friend who anxiety was so bad she would have to leave and go to the ED because her heart rate would spike and she just was having panic attacks at work. And she was, when you're talking about the rock stars in nursing school, she was tip top. So I remember I had to meet my manager at the time to just talk about a nursing committee that I was on, just give her updates because I was the champion of that committee. And I just remember saying, hey, like, I've recently been struggling with drinking. I just wasn't really coping with what I was seeing, but like I've just I've got to do something else for me because it's just not working and that's not how I want to live my life. And the first thing she said, which looking back I understand it, was, "Have you ever been to work impaired?" So at that moment I just felt like I opened myself up vulnerably and it was just crushed. Now, I'm in a supervisor role now and I understand the implications of what I was saying and she had to cover this. So I think, we'll cover that later, but like when and who and creating an environment where we could speak about these things. So fast forward, I ended up coming to where I'm at now, um, in the height of COVID. And I worked at the bedside here in the small ICU that got everything that couldn't be escalated to a different or high level of care. So what was great about coming home was my commute went from an hour to 8 minutes, right? So I left work, my coffee was still hot. My car was even done warming up by the time I got here. So it was great. What wasn't great is I started taking care of my neighbors, my friends, family, people I had known in the community for a long time. So I started feeling like that emotional aspect again. And I just remember like COVID got so bad. And I know our lives will forever be changed by COVID. And I kind of hate talking about it because you're like, oh, how's COVID affected supply chain, right? But it's really affected nursing and how we care for other people and how we care for ourselves. So I worked here for about 2.5 years, 3 years. And then I ended up taking care of a great friend's dad who, when we transferred him, he ended up passing. So COVID, all those things. And it wasn't even the height of COVID. It was like, man, he has COVID. That's so weird. And then I had a weekend off and I came back and I had the same patient situation, different patient. And it was terrible. His wife was at the bedside asking me, should her kids come back? His dad was at the bedside. And in nursing, you see all aspects of life. You see the highest highs, you see people coming, like just babies, deaths, all these great things, but then you see the other side of it. And I just remember his like dad holding on to me. And I'm not a big person, but like I'm holding this man up. So after that, I talked to my husband. I'm like, I can't do this. Like I am getting to that point again that I felt myself previously. So I stepped away from bedside. I went to education at the same hospital and I would check in with my people here and there. And then about 6 months later, the clinical supervisor educator role came open. And I remember my then boss, now boss, reaching out to me and I was like, sure, like I'd love to be back with our people. Like I felt like we were all trauma bonded. And I feel like that's another topic. And I was like, I would love to be back. So very early on, I can't even remember what we were talking about, but a situation came back that triggered a memory for all of the staff. And it was one of those moments where everyone stopped what they were doing and they just talked about how bad that situation was and how they could recount their whole day from this tiny portion of their 12-hour shift. They recounted everything and how they felt. And you could just see like the vibe shifted. There was no more laughing for the rest of the day. There was no more, it was just somber. So I had reached out to a third party organization. I basically just started combing social media, like what are our resources? What do? We have an employee assistance program with our company. But I was like, I think we need to do more. So I got a third party company in here that was willing to do a peer support group. So I was not included. My manager wasn't included, which was fine. And we did it once a month. It was virtual. And initially, like anytime you start something new and it's shiny, a lot of people go. And then by the second or third time, people start coming like, oh, I don't work that day. I'm not going to come in. But what I saw were the people who continuously went and made that commitment to not only themselves, but the other people that went. It was like this ripple effect that they started checking in with each other. They said, hey, can I watch your team while you take a breath? Like go outside, like just take a walk. Hey, like let's do craft night. Do you guys want to go see a movie? Hey, let's go plan this trip. Like, let's have this night out. And I just thought like, sometimes we pair success with participation and the numbers that you get. So I know that's something that you guys also look at, like how are we engaging in our community? How can we get, you know, people to join our site? And I think even if you meet one person and you can change that directive where they can hold space for themselves and then learn to hold space for each other. So what I also found is not everybody's willing to receive that, because you have to be able to acknowledge, hey, I'm not in a good spot. Hey, I'm having a hard time. Because once you acknowledge those feelings, then you have to say, everything I've been doing to this point is not serving me. And some people are in that fight or flight, like, all I can do is come to work, do my job, and go home. And it either works for you and you leave the profession and you're one of those people that can say, hey, it's just a job and I make my money, or it doesn't, because you want to feel like you made a difference. And making a difference to people at work is, hey, I was able to get my patient in the chair, I braided their hair, or I was able to get my patient outside today who hasn't been outside in weeks. And if you don't have the energy to just take that for yourself, you can't really incorporate that to other people. So we all know there's research linked to mental wellness in nurses and patient outcomes, right? But then to see it form here, I mean, I have no data, but I can see like just patients, right? Those silly moments that, not even silly, but just special moments that people could not put the extra effort in. I see that happen more and more often. And they are, trying to do different things together, and we're trying to bulk up, that was a third party company. We're trying to see what we can do grassroots, but what that led to me too is just, how do we humanize our jobs, right? Because we all know that patients are getting sicker. We're seeing more patients. We have more tasks to do. You're not just a nurse, you're housekeeping, you're secretary, you're also chaplain, you're doing all of these things. So, how do you humanize that when you feel like you're being stretched thin? And I think that starts by making sure that you feel like a human and saying, what feels good today? Why don't I feel, or, what doesn't feel good? Like, why am I anxious? And trying to pinpoint that and checking in with yourself first. And then really, you honor your profession by honoring yourself. So I think, back baby nurse Maura, I don't think I was really honoring myself because I wasn't doing the work to make sure I was okay, make sure I was dealing with these emotions, or I just felt like I just had this big bucket and I was just filling traumatic things with it. Because then you talk to these nurses who've been nurses for 40 years and like, one time I had to do this out back, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy, like I can't wait to be like you. And then you're like, man, that was crazy that you did that, are you okay? But no one at that time was asking this question. So I think that's right now where I'm at as a supervisor. And then just, how do we create this inclusive environment for nurses that are struggling? So instead of saying, you messed up, you're not doing a good job, how could you do that, to saying like, yes, I need to make sure that you're a safe person to take care of patients, but I need to know that you're safe as a person. I need to know that you feel safe, that the decisions that you're making are taking care of yourself first. And just, I think if you start that like at work, now I'm not saying that, everything will be great at work, but we do spend more time here with our family than our families. We go through things that we can't even talk about with our families because they don't understand. I remember, like, we have a 20-bed ICU, and in a weekend, 14 people died. So Friday to Sunday, 14 people gone. And I remember talking to my mom, who was a hospice nurse, and my dad, who was in the military, and be like, how do you fathom this much death? Because I've seen death, but I haven't seen this much death in this window. And it would get to the point where my husband would be like, you guys have to stop talking about this, because every time that we meet, it's just death, death, death. But I think, you know, if we create a space where people feel comfortable to talk at work and feel supported and feel honored, like, hey, you're a human. I recognize that you're having some difficult emotions, and I recognize that this is a difficult time for you. Please take time for yourself. I think that extends beyond the bedside, because we know that traumatic things don't start happening in the hospital. They happen to people every day. We have sick family members. We have, we're at the mall and something terrible happens, or, you drive by an accident. You have to explain to your children, like, hey, this is what happened. And your kids have questions. So I think it all just starts with how you take care of yourself. And then that leads to, how do I take care of others? And how do I make this the the best that it can be.
I mean, what a wonderful story. Thank you. Well, and I feel like there's even room for us to go back and dive into some of those stories. I would
I have
like,
so many follow-ups.
Okay, I'm sorry because I
Thank
felt like I
you.
was like.
no, that's
No,
I have
it
notes.
was so
Okay.
powerful.
Okay.
Yeah, you
packed
did
in
amazing.
and impactful. I kind of see this leading to another call at another time,
Okay.
to expand on some of these other ancillary avenues.
Okay.
Um, one of the things I would like to talk about is to kind of start with is that the preparedness versus mental resilience,
Hmm.
because I think it's very important in the big scheme of things to say, okay, how do we start tackling these concerns? Because theoretically, as you pointed out, yes, you can build a support system at work, but there's also barriers to creating that support system
Right.
or maintaining that support
Hmm.
system, right? Um, uh, how do we reach people at different points? And well, I didn't know about it then, but I know about it now. And how do I fix it now? To me, it all kind of stems from that preparedness versus mental resilience are really kind of two in the same. But
Right.
I think you're differentiating that you thought you were prepared
Yes.
coming out of school,
Right.
but finding out that, hey, maybe I wasn't prepared in some of the ways that I really needed to be
Right.
prepared. So, coming from the standpoint of the care for nurses piece and what our vision was early on was addressing the early career nurse.
Hmm.
Um, Little side note for your information, we started with just trying to reach out to the nurse grads and the early career nurses within less than
Right.
3 years.
Hmm.
But in doing so, we had a tremendous amount of people knocking at our door going, but what about us? I've been in this for 10 years
Yeah.
and I need help,
Mhm.
and we kind of came to that same conclusion that those early career nurses don't necessarily know that they need the support or need the help. So I want to talk a little bit about your experience going through grad school, going through the preparation for that, and kind of if you could dial into some very specifics of, and I know you gave us some stories and
Yeah.
examples, but maybe some things that if you could go back and tell your nursing student self three things, what would that be?
Um, I think I don't know. That's a lot because I think there's a lot of things that I would change, right? Um, I would say though, I remember when you guys sent out that flyer because I think you guys got everyone's address from the board. And I remember
Mhm.
being here and someone's like, "Oh, hey, did you get this?" And I'm like, "No, because I've been a nurse longer than 3 years. What is it?" And they're like, "Oh, we're going to talk about like mental wellness." And like, I was like, "Good for you." Right. Um, and I remember like talking to someone on the board, like, "Hey, like there's this big group of those people, like the tenured novices that we're missing out on that kind of people forget about because, hey, we've got you in the door, we've retained you. Now go do your
Mhm.
job." So I think moving forward, yes, it's great to get new grads. Hey, this is what you're going to see. I remember I had a simulation on death. And I remember saying in the simulation, hey, she's gone, right? Because we had to tell this family member that they were dead. And the lady was like, "What do you mean? Where has she gone?" And I said, "She's passed away." "Oh, what does that mean?" The teacher wanted to say, "This patient has died," right? But what did that teach me other than like it's an awkward conversation and that's a learned technique, right? You're not going to send your nurse grad to say, "Hey, this patient's," right? You're going to send a little bit more tactful person, which great, you want someone with experience that can say those things, that has that empathy to build on with a little bit more life experience. But how hard does that get after doing it the 10th, 20th, 30th time that you're the go-to person to say, "Did you have those family discussions?" I remember it was like, "Hey, we're gonna have that quality of life prognosis talk." "Okay, give me a second, I'm ready," right? So you're just putting in character, and then you're kind of losing that genuine feel of, hey, like you're talking to someone and they're making a decision that's going to affect them and their loved one for the rest of their life, no matter if it's an hour from now or whatever. And I remember feeling that, like, hey, this is what I would say in this situation. This is what I would do. Here's your shoulder pat therapeutic touch. Here's my, I understand how difficult this might be for you. This is a very loving decision. So I think, making sure that each, whether you're experienced or you're inexperienced, you've been here for 2 months or 2 years or 20 years, we all have those tools to kind of navigate to check in with ourselves, because it might start as like a little snowball with a nurse grad, right? So, hey, I care about my mental wellness. I want to take a break. Well, if you have someone who's never made space for that and is unfamiliar, well, we don't take breaks. We gotta do this. We gotta do this, and we gotta do this postmortem care. We have to do that, right? So once you shift the dynamic to say, hey, you have seen some things and you have experienced things that not many people can connect to, what do you do for that? And people are, well, never, no one's ever asked me. So then you're creating a different narrative where, like, oh, it is important that we check in with ourselves. Oh, it is important that I check in with how I'm feeling, and, feelings that come out after these conversations or situations. And then that snowball that got stopped initially keeps rolling downhill. So I think, three things that I would tell to nurse grad Mara is, you don't have to be okay with everything you do, right? You just have to live with yourself after. So I would say that, because I think, being a type A and wanting to be super successful, anything less than now is a failure. So I'd also say to, like, be easy on yourself, because, like I've said, people aren't seeing this. When you're looking at your 10-year reunion, which, it's been a little bit for me, but I'm looking around the room, I'm like, these are people who I literally have nothing in common with anymore, because I've just spent the past several years in COVID land and they just don't get it. Right. So, be easy on yourself. And I would say, like I've said before, just honor yourself, because yes, you've seen people come to nursing profession for money. It's always going to be a job. You're always going to be independent. You can always find a job anywhere. But that does not mean that anyone can be a nurse, right? You can be a nurse and not be a good nurse, right? So to be good at what you do, there has to be some of that, like, heartfelt need to connect with people. And I would just say, like, that's not easy, and it's not a job that anyone can do. So those are the three things that I would say to her.
I
She
love
would
that. That's
listen.
good.
She's very stubborn, so I don't know.
Well, that's again preparedness, right?
Right.
I can relate to the high achieving part of it, and giving yourself permission as a mom, as a wife, as a woman, as a whatever situation you find yourself in, to take a breath.
Mhm.
I'm not a nurse, but that still speaks to me, because maybe it's the personality type, right? We're constant go, 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 thinking ahead, thinking of this person, thinking of that, thinking of how things work together. But it's okay to give yourself that space. And it took me a long time to practice that and to become okay with that.
Mhm.
I think COVID for me forced that more than anything, because now I had to stay at home with my children and also work from home with my children. And that is a dynamic that is not easy to navigate. So I appreciate that. That's very helpful. Um, what would, oh, go ahead, Mark. You want to say something. You're muted though.
You know me, I always want to say something. The one thing, adding to what Mara said about the new grad and what you would tell them, because, my last job at CAMC was the director of nursing education. And the one thing that I would always tell the new grads that were coming in was, when you get out and when you are going through your preceptorship, be sure and find someone to be your mentor, a nurse that you can look at and say, that's the kind of nurse I want to be. If my family were in this hospital, I would want that nurse to take care of me. I want to be like that nurse. Now, that may not be your preceptor,
Right.
because we tend to assign preceptors to people. And maybe that great nurse isn't a great preceptor for a new grad, because not everybody can do that. But pick somebody out that you want to pattern the way you are going to be a nurse in the future.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't do that. And as a nursing profession, I probably shouldn't say this, but we also have a tendency to eat our own young. And older nurses sometimes are really hard on new grads because it was a whole lot harder when I got out of school. And you hear that over and over. And, it's very disappointing to me. Let's put it that way.
So there's some really great thoughts. I really appreciate that. Again, I'm paralleling that to being a parent. Nobody can prepare you to be a parent. Absolutely nobody. You can read as many books as you want. You can be a child yourself. You can have parents. But man, when you actually get into throes of being a parent, you do have to build your support system and your coping there, because it's a whole new ball game. So I can relate to that. And finding those moms that in the community, you're like, I want to be like that mom, So I appreciate that.
Real quick, I think what I'm thinking about, if you're getting into nursing because you want to help people and connect and you want to do these great things, part of it seems to be working on yourself so that you're better equipped to do these things. It seems like a no-brainer. I mean, one of the things that I wrote down, of course, I'm not a nurse, so I do have kids. But so what I wrote down was, to make it in nursing, you're either going to have to compartmentalize and cope and do that thing where, okay, I'm leaving, I'm switching it off. And there's all kinds of problems with, maybe, coping mechanisms that aren't healthy with that. Or you're going to make a decision, you're going to go walk straight into it, which is what it sounds like you've done. And you're arming yourself, you're learning to walk into it. And part of how you carry yourself is how you're really helping these people. Did I make sense with that?
You did. You did.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, both of those serve their purpose at the same time, right? Like if you're not in a place to get the resources you need or really face that, then yeah, compartmentalizing and just putting your head down and getting through it, that serves its purpose. And, long term, maybe not. But if you're in that, fight or flight phase of your life, if your job is stressful and God forbid something's going on in your personal life, you're getting divorced, your child is sick, because just because you're a nurse does not mean that you're immune to all these other things, right? So yes, I agree. Compartmentalize, do your job, come into work, leave, go home and deal with what you can, right? Then say things slow down at home or work gets a little less stressed. Those things that you compartmentalize and shut out, they're still there. So, and they'll come out in the trickiest of places. So, whether a weird family situation triggers something for you, or you're taking care of someone that really strikes home for you, or them, like these things are going to come up. So then, hey, I have the time. And I think that shift in focus of like, I'm worth it. I'm worth taking time to invest in myself, to better myself, and be selfish about things like, hey, I can't take this assignment back today because A, B, C, and D. That's okay to say. And I think nurses sometimes are afraid to say that because it's like, you don't want to be that nurse. It's like, oh, I'm a princess, I'm a diva. Because I've been there, right? I was an ICU nurse at a level 1 trauma center, and I came to a community hospital ICU and I was like, what? I have to do all these things. They're like, yeah, and you just get it done. It's grown me as a nurse, but at the same time, like, you have to be selfish with yourself. because nobody else is going to do that for you. At least not right away. If I notice that someone's having a bad day and I'm like, hey, go take a break. I'm fine. I'm looking at you and you're not fine. So this facade that you're putting on, you're not selling it. Go take a break and come back better, because you pushing through this in an ICU, in the hospital, anywhere, nothing is guaranteed the next second. So, hey, I have enough reserve to get through this traumatic event, but I have an open bed. So who knows what's coming down the pipe? So I'm always trying to advocate for people, take a step away, let me watch your patients. I am a nurse too, and I can watch. I promise I can do what you're doing, and I can take care of your patients. And if I have time to braid their hair, sure, I'll try. But just be selfish for yourself, because nursing is selfless enough.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point. And what I hear, we talk about boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. Understand what your boundaries are and establishing your boundaries. Right. But then what I hear nurses say is, but I can't, or but the hospital overrides the boundaries, right, or but I have to do what I'm told. So do you have some practical advice in that situation if a nurse feels that they don't have the authority to establish their own boundaries when it comes to them and the role that they're serving?
I don't know if people will like this answer, but I'm going to say it because it's what came to me. Everybody has a boss. Okay. And if you're not getting the answer that you like, it's like when you're trying to get medications for your patient. That's crazy. You go to the resident, they're not getting an answer. Okay, then you go to the fellow, and then if you need to, you go to the attending, right? If where you're at is not fostering this ability for you to create boundaries and adhere to them in a way that is not creating moral injury, your boss has a boss. And if you get to enough bosses, somebody will care. And I think there's been a shift where, like, hey, mental wellness is important. And we've noticed that if people are burnt out, they're not going to take care of patients better, right? It's all over all of these, like, ABCD companies that do surveys for us or do audits for us. Like, we know that. So I do understand, though, and that in the moment, even if you're new to an organization or a new facility, and that's new for you, like maybe you started therapy or you're practicing boundaries, it can be scary. But I think, again, being brave for yourself is worth it. And I think regardless of, if that person has the ability to honor your boundaries, you speak loud enough, because then you're opening up the door for somebody else to say, you know what, I really don't like this either. And someone's like, hey, yeah, that's actually an issue here. Well, there has to be a common theme. So you get enough people to get loud about the same thing and to keep pounding on people's doors, like, this isn't safe. This isn't fostering an environment where I feel safe to practice or I feel safe as a person. Like, you get enough people saying that, and people have to listen. Mm-hmm. But it takes
just yeah. I'm sorry.
It just takes one person, like, and that's hard, but just kind of be the juggernaut for that.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, sticking up for yourself, giving yourself permission to advocate for yourself,
right,
can become a change agent, is what I hear you saying. Yes. That ripple effect that you talked about. Right. I love that. That's great advice. Thank you. I'm looking at your notes here. There's so many things. The last 10 minutes, I don't know, Mark or Mike, do you have any questions off the top of your head? I know I'm throwing you all as well.
I do, unless Mark has something burning.
No, go ahead, Mike.
You made a comment. You were talking early on in the session today about I don't know if you considered yourself to be an addict, or I don't know if it got to that point, or you were just noticing that you were coping. But I'm curious where that got to and what you did about it, and also you said you didn't want to be that way with your kids.
Right.
what happened? Tell me more about that.
So, um, I think it's hard because I think I have a skewed perspective, because when I think alcoholic, I think the people that are DTing, hey, it's been 48 hours since my drink, you know. And I remember in nursing school going over the cage questions. And it was like, you know, have you ever felt guilty? Have you ever tried cutting off? Like, have you ever, like, you know, anyone been angry at you? And I just remember being like, oh, whoops, right? Because I wasn't that traditional student that, hey, I went to school and then I became. So it's always been this like theme, right? Now, later in life, I've been to therapy and it's been like, yes, you have ADHD. So you're always dopamine seeking. And I think I have addictive tendencies, if that makes sense. Like, I'm like, let's start a craft. Let's buy all the things that it needs to make it, and I'm going to be excellent at it. And then it turns out that crocheting's really hard and it's not for me. So here I have all this yarn or these half 10% started project. So I think it was like this slow, dangerous flirting thing that happened. And, you know, we don't just start nursing without having a background, right? Which now sometimes we see, you know, there's 20-year-olds in the, like, that I work with, and I'm like, what has your life been like? And they're like, well, you know, I'm saving a bunch of money, I'm living at home. I'm like, great, love that for you. But it wasn't like that for me. So coming late in it, like I was like this seasoned adult, like I had all these, you know, pastimes. And like I said, addiction ran in my family, and I'd witnessed some things that, you know, oh, that's just so and so. We don't really go around them at this point, or, you know, hey, we no longer see this family member. Oh, okay, why? Well, you know, later in life, these stories come out and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know. They're like, we didn't want to tell you. And so fast forward to, I don't want to live my life that way. It's like, I just saw, like, I just didn't, when I pictured my life and what it would be like, I didn't want to bring someone into the world that had to worry about me or make excuses for me, or, you know, be one of those stories that we hear all the time that, you know, and that's just not how I wanted to live my life. So, you know, things were struggling with my marriage, things were struggling with my friendships. Like, it just, even the friendships that I had that were great, like they were centered around drinking and going out and, you know, just having a good time. And it's like, when you get to the basis of that, that's not a great environment that you want to grow in, right? Because you're waking up feeling guilty that, oh my goodness, first off, you feel terrible. But I wouldn't
Mhm.
say, you know, textbook alcoholism, but I will say that addictive, like, coping mechanism was there. So, like I said, didn't want my kids to see that. And, you know, now that I have two kids and I'm going to therapy, and I also, nothing is successful the first time you try it. So let me say that. So anybody that would hear this and be like, oh my gosh, she quit cold turkey. Yes. But I also think that people's like, you're on or you're off 100%, like, is sabotaging yourself. So being able to navigate that personally now looks like, hey, if I would like to have a drink because we're going out to dinner, it's date night, that's a drink, right? It doesn't mean I have to have 4 or 5 or 6 or finish said drink, right? We're not in college. Nobody's calling you out on it anymore. And then two, like, there's a time and a place for everything for me. And I just don't feel the need anymore to have that. Now, there's always like this voice sometimes be like, yeah, but don't you miss those days? Sure. Was it fun going out with my friends? Yes. And I loved having those, like, I don't know, just a terrible shift. And we're all just sitting there and we're able to laugh it off. Right. Those were so fun. And I treasure those moments with those people, minus the point where I'm like, okay, now we're just like introducing alcohol. And I think there's a way that you can do that without that. And I've also said, like, people like, hey, you can drink around me. I'm like, hey, I'm not drinking. And I've, you know, advocated for that for my close friends, like, hey, and just being kind of like open and honest with them. So, you know, have I had backpedalings where I'm like, hey, you know, postpartum, Elizabeth, your mom is terrible, right? And then there's culture around that too, mom juice, right? So, you know, that's maybe a different story for a different time, but like, the opportunity to backslide is there, right? But now I'm not just my job. I'm not just a nurse. I'm not just somebody who comes to work and does the thing. Like, I'm replaceable here. I'm not replaceable at home. And to me,
Mhm.
like, doing anything that would sabotage these special moments of my family is not worth it to me. So what that looks like for me in the future is having those conversations with my children. Hey, like, I get it that kids are kids and teenagers are teenagers and college is a thing. You have to be careful because I see similarities between me and my son, who will be 5 in February, and I can't believe it. But we're just like cut from the same cloth. And where I want to meet him is, hey, I've done this work. I went to therapy. I've got, medicated. I'm here at this point, and I don't want you to go through what I went through, at least alone. I think there's a point to self discovery, and there are lessons that you have to learn by yourself. But I love my parents. I had a great childhood, but there are things that, like, I think parents before just didn't talk about because it just wasn't, accepted or, as open of a conversation as it is now. So even telling my parents, like, hey, I'm in my 30s and I just got diagnosed with ADHD, they're like, now that you mention it, that makes sense. And I was like, okay, so we're just gonna open the door here. So I don't want my son later in life to be like, come on, like, what, why not, like, and I just want him to know that, like, I fully support him and accept him for everything that he is, like, good, bad, ugly, beautiful things. And I think we can do that for our friends, right? We can do that. Hey, I see you, I know that you're having a hard time, like, I don't care, let me come over. I don't care if you're in your PJs and you haven't showered in 4 days because you're in a depressive slump and you had this bad assignment. Like, let me come over. Let me bring dinner to you because we need those people. And I think knowing what I've needed back then has pushed me to try to be that person because I know
Mhm.
I'm not the only person that's dealt with this. I know, Mark, you've dealt with many nurses, and it's like, what a career helping people. But I know I'm not alone. I might just be the only one who is speaking about it here in this moment, but I know I'm not alone.
And I think to your point, normalizing it, creating a new culture because we do have so many culturally acceptable excuses to drink or
Right.
partake in recreational drugs or whatever the case may. The mom juice, I have a friend who is a critical care nurse, and I was like, how are you doing? I'm checking in on you. This was during COVID. She's like, well, I have my best friends, Johnny, Jack, and Jimmy. And I'm like, well, okay, that's not really the best coping skill here, but those are socially and
Accepted.
culturally
Yeah.
accepted. And so I think creating a new culture for yourself
Right.
also can have a ripple effect to those around you
Right.
and saying, okay, this doesn't have to be the standard.
Right.
So I think that's critical. And I think that also lends itself to one of the things I was going to ask you, but we're at the coming up to our hour. So maybe I'm going to put this out there, but really kind of talking and revisiting your statement when you were talking about that piece of your life is finding somebody you feel safe to talk to.
Right.
Because based on our conversation last time, if our memory serves me correctly, you were put in a situation where you didn't necessarily felt safe, or you thought you were safe,
Right.
and then something else happened, and you weren't safe. So, I don't think we need to dive in that today, but I
Right.
do want to put it out there
Right.
so we can remember,
Yeah.
because I think that's important, right? Is establishing and determining. Yeah, okay, that's the right word. Didn't sound right when I said it. Who we can talk to,
Right.
and in what situation do we need to talk to them, and what are our resources
Right.
available in work or out of work. So yeah, I'd love to dive more into that next time we have a chance to talk.
Okay.
So yeah. Oh, excited. It's a great conversation. I love it.
Yeah,
Let me gab.
this was so good, so powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very
Really
much so.
appreciate you being so honest with us.
Thank you.
Well, and it definitely helps, it helps having somebody that has the understanding and the knowledge and the perspective to answer these questions that we're hearing that I know that I can't speak to,
Right.
Um, and so that's incredibly helpful, and having your voice heard is going to have a ripple effect. So I'm very grateful to having you here. Maura, thank you so much. I loved hearing your stories and some very valuable feedback and tips to help us, understand your journey, but also the ripple effect. I think it's a very powerful statement and the change that we can have here. So I'd love to continue the conversation with you at another time. There's so much that we couldn't get to today,
Okay.
but I love the opportunity to be able to connect with you at another time.
Okay.
And for those of you that are listening to this, if you have questions for Maura, Mara, if you have questions for Mara, please let us know, right? Make a comment to the video. We'll make sure to maybe get her plugged in to answer those questions directly in the platform, or even invite her to come to one of the groups, right? So she can be there to help answer any questions that you all may have. But yeah, we would love for you to continue to engage here in the platform, keep the discussion going. If you know of somebody who has not signed up yet, or if you haven't signed up and you're hearing this video from one of our other platforms, please take the opportunity to do that at carefornurses.com. And if there's any other topic requests that you have for us, please feel free to let us know. But I am going to do a reminder about those live groups. Every single week we have somebody available to you to hop into. If you need that support, if you are struggling with a particular situation and you don't know who to talk to, maybe you don't have a safe place to go to, this place is a completely confidential and safe environment for you to ask questions or just get support, or allow us to help you with finding some resources. So thank you again for joining us and listening, and we'll see you the next time.